While the use of genetic modification in foods has raised concerns around potential health impacts, scientists are now looking at a new way to try and improve the products that we eat. It's called gene editing. It's a process that could soon leave our foods tastier, larger, and more resilient. Joining us this morning is Professor of Food Distribution at Dalhousie University, Sylvain Charlebois. And Sylvain, first question, what is different between gene editing and gene modification, and why is gene editing believed to be the better approach?
Well, I'm not sure it's a better approach. It's a different approach. It's not as significant. Gene editing is really about tweaking the genome of a plant. So, for example, if you want a mushroom not to brown as fast, you can do that through gene editing. Whereas GMOs, genetically modified seeds or genetically modified organisms, is really about crossing species. Canola is a GMO. It was created by humans in a lab. And so that's really what the difference between the two.
What kinds of gene editing efforts are already underway? Where do we see it in foods, and how are the foods being changed?
So we don't believe that there's any gene-edited foods on grocery shelves right now in Canada, but in the United States, we've seen projects related to tomatoes and mushrooms. Soya also. There's been some trials on soya as well in the United States, but if it's happening in the United States, eventually will come to Canada. But when you look at Health Canada regulations, certification and approvals aren't necessary at this point. So that's why you're likely going to see gene-edited foods in our supply chain without any approvals whatsoever.
Yeah, interesting to note the U.S. is proposing to treat foods with edited DNA just like any other food, while the European Union is leaning towards treating them the same as GMO products. You mentioned how Canada is planning to treat gene-editing food products and whether or not we should be concerned about them. Is there a reason for concern?
On the other side of the Atlantic, they always look at the process to create food. And that's why there's a difference between Europe and, say, North America. In North America, we look at outcomes. And so we don't see any difference between a gene-edited tomato, for example, versus a conventional tomato, certification is not necessarily required. That's the difference between the two. Mandatory labeling is, of course, in Europe it is there, but in Canada we have a voluntary labeling policy. That's why consumers, when you walk into a grocery store, you don't see which food actually has genetically modified content. But the reality is that 75 to 80% of everything you see in a grocery store that has been processed would contain a genetically modified ingredient. And really, you can't tell as a consumer.
Interesting. Sylvain Charlebois, thanks for joining us this morning.
My pleasure.
Thanks for watching. If you like this, be sure to subscribe here.
And you can check out more Your Morning videos right here.